Good morning, Professor. This is John Bias. This will be my assignment for this week, our video Bible lesson. We were to choose a story between Genesis 1 and Exodus 15, and I chose the story of Joseph. The audience that I would be sharing this with would most likely be a group of men in a Bible study in my home or on a Friday night at Celebrate Recovery. The story of Joseph is quite often shared in recovery, because of the similarities between how Joseph lived, the faith that he had, and although there was a lot of bad in his life that he may or may not had control over, in the end, God was with Joseph, and the ultimate plan that God had for him blessed many people. So we can take that in recovery as no matter how bad we've lived or the circumstances that we might have gone through, no matter how bad we think that they are, God ultimately can use us through our testimonies to help other people. And I believe that's exactly what he used Joseph for. So let me go ahead and get started. So basically the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel, a long-awaited son of Jacob. He had for many years wanted a son with Rachel, and because she was barren, he had children with Leah and their concubines, and one day the Lord blessed Rachel with a child, and that child was Joseph. And I'm sure you can read in the story of Joseph that he was favored probably more than the other brothers were, and this angered his brothers. The coat of colors, basically a robe that was a decadent, colors and jewels and so forth. The other brothers probably feel like that should have been given to them and not Joseph. So there was a lot of anger and tension with his brothers straight out of the gate. And then one day Joseph shares a couple dreams with his family that he had, and the Lord spoke to Joseph through these dreams, and the dreams basically say that one day the heaven and the stars are going to bow down to Joseph. The brothers took this as a huge insult, that they were going to have to bow down to the spoiled brother, if you will, and there was a lot of anger and resentment because of that. One day, all the brothers are out to gather food, and they come up with this plan and this scheme to kill their brother and go back and basically tell their father Jacob that the wolves ate him. Reuben stepped in to intercede for his brother and tried to spare him this fate by just putting him into a pit. And later Reuben would come back and save him. Well, while Reuben was away, the Egyptians were passing by, and they came up with the scheme to just sell him to the Egyptians as a slave. Bloody up this coat of this robe with the colors, take it back to Jacob, and basically say that, hey, the wolves got a hold of Joseph and he's gone, which is ultimately what they did. Joseph is taken back to Egypt, and he is sold to the Pharaoh as a slave, and through time, Joseph, it was very well received by the Pharaoh that Joseph was with the Lord, and the Lord was with him, and he was blessed. The more responsibility and the more things that the Pharaoh gave to Joseph to do, the more blessings that came back to the Pharaoh, to the point where ultimately Joseph was, very well trusted in Egypt. The Pharaoh's wife had an eye for Joseph. The Bible says that Joseph was a upright, good-looking man, and he caught the eye of the Pharaoh's wife, and she had proposed to him a couple times to be with her, and he rejected her and said that your husband has given everything to me to protect, and I'm not going to betray him. And the wife being the Pharaoh's most prized possession, he's not going to cross that line. Well, one day the Pharaoh's wife gets upset because he rejects her, and she takes his garment that he left behind and basically frames Joseph for trying to make a pass at her, and Joseph is thrown in prison. While Joseph's in prison, a couple of the Pharaoh's other associates end up in prison as well. And through that time, they have dreams. Each one of them have a dream, and they don't know exactly what it means. And Joseph translates the dreams for them. Well, they're both let out of prison. One of them ends up dying. The other one goes back into the Pharaoh's rotation of work, the baker, and he forgets about Joseph and what he did for him. And, you know, Joseph had made the comment to him, all I ask of you is to remember me when you talk to the Pharaoh. And with, you know, letting him know what he had done for him, helping him with the with his dream. And he forgets. And a couple years go by, and the Pharaoh has a series of dreams himself, and he can't understand them. And he asked everybody in Egypt to come and to translate these dreams for him. Nobody could come close. And then one day, the baker remembers, hey, there was this man in prison, Joseph, who translated the dreams, and as he translated them, they came true. So the Pharaoh summons Joseph back in and asks him to translate these dreams, which Joseph does. And he basically tells the Pharaoh that the Lord has spoken that we're going to have 7 years of plentiful harvest, followed by 7 years of famine. And the Lord is telling you to take the 7 years of blessings and save them and store them up so that you can make it through the 7 years of famine. So the Pharaoh takes Joseph at his word and puts Joseph in charge of basically all the food for Egypt. He's the man who everybody has to come to for food. He's also the one who everyone has to take all the bounty to so it can be stored up. So the 7 years go by, and the first 7 years of harvest, and you know, Egypt stores all of this food up, and they have just a plentiful, bountiful of food. And the 7 years of famine hit, and as it, you know, really starts to get bad, one day Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt to get some food. And while they're there getting their food, Joseph sees his brothers. And now the brothers don't know who Joseph is, but he confronts them, and they still don't know who he is. And he basically says, where do you come from? And they say, hey, you know, we're here for our father Jacob. He sent us down here to get food so that we can, you know, take it back to our family and survive. And so basically Joseph keeps one of their brothers, sends the others back to Jacob to bring Jacob, you know, back down to Egypt. They do this. Fast forward, you know, Joseph sees the brothers come back. They bring their father. They find out that Joseph really is their brother. He's now the one who is in charge of feeding basically the world at this point. You know, there's a lot of fear by the brothers because they know what they've done to him. They know that they lied to their father. They know that they set him up to be, you know, basically a slave or killed or worse. And, you know, Joseph is used by the Lord in a mighty way. Ultimately, in the end, Joseph, you know, fulfills the Lord's purpose. He saves many, many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or even millions of people from starvation. And, you know, Joseph explains to his brothers, I don't want you to be in fear or worry. I know what you did to me was intended for evil, but the Lord had other plans, and he meant these things as a blessing. And, you know, the story that I get out of that is, you know, through no matter what, good or bad, God always works for good for those that believe in him. And we hear that in Romans. But, you know, being in recovery, we come in broken, and we come in lost without anything. And there's a lot of guilt, shame, remorse that we feel. And I think that the story of Joseph can, you know, clearly show that no matter what we've been through, that as long as we're faithful in Him in the end, that He will use even our worst situations to help and benefit others, just like He did with Joseph. You know, his brothers wanted to kill him. Instead, he was taken and basically became the second most powerful man in Egypt, and he saved many, many people, and that was God's plan. I'm sure that Joseph had many doubts along the way. He probably didn't know that ultimately that all these things were going to work out the way that they did, but he never lost faith. And I think that's important. I think it's an important lesson for us to learn. That's why I like the story of Joseph. There's many others in the Bible that talk to the same point. And, you know, today I just chose Joseph to speak about. So I ran about a minute long, and I know that there's a lot of improvement that I can do. I'm not really a good speaker, so I hope you have some grace with me. And that's it. So I'll go ahead and sign off, and I will put my notes as you requested along with the video and post it up on Populi. Have a great day. Blessings.